are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to the June program webinar featuring problem gambling prevention. My name is Derek Longmire, and with me is Emily Brown, who will serve as our session monitor. Due to the quantity of callers, all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. However, we do want your feedback. If you have questions, please enter them into the questions field of your GoToWebinar navigation panel. Technical assistance questions will be answered in the order in which they are received, and program-specific questions will be queued until the question and answer portion of today's session. Should you have technical difficulty during today's webinar, please contact the GoToWebinar helpline at 800-263-6317. They will need to know your webinar ID to assist you. That webinar ID is 185-730-561. And I'm sure you all are scrambling to write this information down, so let me say it one more time. The helpline number is 800-263-6317, and the webinar ID is 185-730-561. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Drug Free Action Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization with specialization in program development focused on strengthening community coalitions and enhancing environmental prevention. Drug Free Action Alliance is based in Columbus, Ohio, with programming implemented in all 50 states, as well as U.S. territories and other countries. For those in your community who are unable to join us today, this session will be recorded. Additionally, as a follow-up to today's training, I will send a link to the recorded webinar, the PowerPoint presentation, and other related information that will assist you in your efforts. Again, my name is Derek Longmire, and joining us today is Emily Brown, who is the coordinator of our Statewide Prevention Coalition Association, and this is her first foray in gambling, so I can tell from the look of her face she's just overly excited about this. So just to give you a little background of where we're coming from, in 2012, gambling through casinos was legalized in Ohio, so there's been some expansion in gambling there. Additionally, 7 racinos, which are horse tracks that have video lottery terminals in them, and video lottery terminals operate very much like a slot machine. It's just overseen by the state lottery. So we have casinos now, racinos, and we've had, since 2010, multi-state lotteries with Keno, as well, and those are legal forms that have expanded, as well as kind of the Internet and its accessibility and other things that are popping up related to that. With the opening of the casinos, the state was provided with additional resources to address raising community awareness related to gambling and addressing problem gambling. And looking at community readiness, we want to make sure that we are set with meeting the community's needs. And there were some challenges in the beginning, and some challenges that we're still experiencing with communities not really seeing a fit for gambling, and why we are addressing gambling now. So hopefully as we go throughout today, we will talk about that and get a better sense of what we can work from. Also, when we're looking at kind of backgrounds and where we're from, I am not someone that is from the gambling or problem gambling field. I've been alcohol and drug throughout my career, and when we were given the opportunity to provide some trainings, we as Drug Free Action Alliance, related to raising community awareness to gambling, the leadership at Drug Free Action Alliance looked to me, because when we're looking at gambling and problem gambling, a lot of the issues are very similar to what we see on the alcohol side. There's a certain age where you're legal to participate in the activity and ages in which it's illegal. So when we're looking at strategies, those were similar, so it made sense that I would be the one to be taking this piece on as well. Also, when we're looking at national conferences, and we've been involved with gambling since April of 2013, so it's just been a little over a year, looking to national leaders in gambling to see kind of where their focus is. And thus far, a lot of their focus has been solely on problem identification and referral to treatment and school-based programming. We know within the spectrum of prevention that there's a lot of other opportunities for really raising awareness and connecting to other things that we do. So we see that Drug Free Action Alliance is a good fit for that, and particularly when we're looking at the environmental strategies in the community-based process. So why focus on gambling now? Access to gambling has increased not only within Ohio but nationally. when we're looking at just the norms of our community, gambling is an acceptable community norm. In many parts of the nation, we're really seeing the first opportunity where youth are becoming completely ingrained in gambling and having it as an opportunity to participate in throughout their entire life. That kind of goes back to the acceptableness of the community norm, and also just kind of the trend as when states receive challenges financially, there's an opportunity to raise some additional revenue. In many communities, we see gambling as a rite of passage, whether it's buying a lottery ticket when you're 18 or going to a casino when you're 21. Those are the regulations in Ohio. I know that casino regulations vary by state. So it's become a rite of passage in part of the U.S. culture. Also, there have been some pretty significant changes from the DSM-IV to the DSM-V related to gambling and its classifications and how we can more better serve those who are having problems with gambling. And while there's implications certainly from the treatment side, there's also a good variety of opportunities that we can address from the prevention side as well. And hopefully this will be a platform to really enhance us in that way. And when we're looking at problem gambling, when we're looking at raising community awareness to some of the issues related to gambling, it only makes sense that we as prevention practitioners are serving that community role. We do it with other things related to substance abuse, other mental health issues that arise, kind of our overall focus on behavioral health. So it makes sense that when we're looking at addiction and issues that we address gambling as well. Just to give you a sense of kind of where we are as a nation with gambling, it's not something that's new to us. It's been around since the beginning of time, pretty much. The Native Americans would roll stone dice, and they would wager on that. We had lotteries for the colonies, and that's really how we funded the foundation of our nation. Then we had some changes related to some reform and prohibition back in the 1870s to the 1930s, and when you look at the timeline related to alcohol, we see a lot of similar things happening. Then in the 1930s, we had casinos opening. Our first ones were in Las Vegas, Nevada, and have kind of expanded from there. The 60s was the introduction to state lotteries, and now all but 2 states participate in a state lottery. In the 90s, we have casinos, beginning kind of with Native American casinos and then expanding to other states. And then in the 2000s, we've seen some public programs developed to address problem gambling. We haven't really seen that before, and with kind of the increase of gambling, there's opportunities to address some of the challenges that come along with that. So we've been able to focus on that. And then the 2010s is really where we've seen technology kind of take hold of gambling and provide additional opportunities such as interstate gambling through the lottery with Mega Millions and Powerballs, Keno, other multi-state games, as well as the expansion from the internet with ways that you can now connect. We'll now take an opportunity to do a poll. There will be some polling questions throughout the session today, hopefully to gauge some interactivity and get a better sense of where you all are coming from. So the question is, do you currently address gambling in your prevention efforts? Please select yes or no now. Again, the question is, do you address gambling in your prevention efforts? And we've got 85% so far. So please select your answer now. And we'll go ahead and close that poll. So we saw that when we're looking at gambling, the majority do, in one way or another, address gambling in your prevention efforts, which is pretty phenomenal. We've got nearly 3/4 of the population looking at addressing gambling in their efforts, which is great to kind of look at where we are and some of the strategies that we have to do that. When we're looking at gambling, gambling is a growth industry. We've got opportunities for growth through tourism. We've got the advances through technology and just making it more accessible to participate in gambling. We also have the benefit to municipalities into nonprofit organizations through generating additional revenue for municipalities through taxes, or just generating funds through nonprofits. So we really do see that gambling is a growth industry. And as the introduction in the email went out, gambling is the number one entertainment activity in the United States. So we want to be really mindful of that in terms of what our community sees as their priority and their way to kind of spend some of their expendable dollars. So when we're looking at legal gambling, annually it's about $95 billion in revenue nationally. So that's a pretty big chunk of change to a variety of individuals. And with that, we've got some different areas of how gambling kind of breaks out. So we've got the majority of gambling being spent through playing the lottery. We've got casino gambling as kind of the next bit, and then we have casual betting with friends. So for our next poll question, I've got to see if I can find it. Here we go. So what forms of legal gambling are available to your community? Each state is different, and there are opportunities that are available to some that are not available to others. So take time. Please answer all. You can select all that apply. So get a look there and make the selection. This will give you a sense of who we have and kind of what areas you see. And when we look at kind of addressing gambling opportunities or ways to address folks, we just want to get a sense of that. So please select the gambling that's available to you. Leave the poll open for a few more seconds. And you'll see that in terms of state lottery, all participants have the state lottery available to them in the states. Most of them have charitable gaming available, so that would be bingo or raffle tickets, things like that. 72% have casinos that are within their state, and then there's 31% that's other, and that could be through internet gambling if it's legal, which is pretty much excluded to Las Vegas right now. Could be other betting with friends and things like that. So just wanted to get a sense of where you were, and it looks like your activities are very similar to Ohio. So when we're thinking about what gambling is, according to McGill University, which is one of the lead universities out of Canada, who does a lot of the research related to gambling behaviors, gambling disorders, etc. Gambling is taking the chance of losing money, belongings, or anything of value when winning or losing is decided mostly by chance. So that's a pretty broad definition, and to make it a little bit more broad, Gamblers Anonymous, which was established in 1984, has this definition. Any betting or wagering for oneself or others, whether or not for money, so there doesn't necessarily have to be a financial piece attached to it, in which the outcome is uncertain or depends on skill or chance. So it doesn't have to be involving money, and it's any bit of uncertainty that could be skill or chance. So when we're thinking about what gambling is, we want to make sure that we've got gambling covered from what we mostly think of, such as lottery, charitable games. We've got our slot machines and our video lottery terminals, which again are like slot machines. There's sports betting, and depending on by state, there's different opportunities there. Card and table games, which are poker, blackjack, roulette, most likely things that you would see on the floors of a casino outside of the slot machines. And then depending on your state, there's animal racing, and there's horse or dog racing, things like that. And then internet gambling, which is kind of illegal in most parts of the country, but we'll see as technology advances if there will be any changes there. There's other things that we might not necessarily think about, such as stock market speculation or day trading. So we know that looking at the stock market, particularly over the last few years with a lot of volatility, we've seen a lot of ups and downs. But there's always some bit of risk to the stock market. But when we're talking about speculation and day trading, the level of risk increases substantially. So that's something just to be mindful of in how that might relate to our communities and that type, the groups that might be participating. Some other things that we may not think about as gambling are things like the Publishers Clearinghouse. So going back to the definition from Gamblers Anonymous, it is something that is, whether or not it's for money, no matter how slight or insignificant. So at the Publishers Clearinghouse, you may not be purchasing the magazines, you might just be spending your time to enter the sweepstakes. So again, we want to look at that as not necessarily connected to money, and it doesn't matter how slight or insignificant. This is more clear when we're looking at gambling disorder and some of the things that relate to that, because those that have gambling problems aren't necessarily those that go to the casinos or who buy lottery tickets. It can be much more broad than that. Other things that kind of looking at that very broad definition are places like David Buster's, Chuck E. Cheese, those gaming places that a lot of youth go to, and think about some of the priming that could have for future gambling choices. Also thinking about school raffle tickets. Raffle tickets are very common here in Ohio, and boosters generate funds for their charities by doing that. So just things to think about there. And then something that just seems very commonplace would be things like the Monopoly game at McDonald's, where you go in and you buy your breakfast meal, and you might get a few tickets with it, and you might get a free meal, or you might get nothing, or you might get those coveted boardwalk and park places so you can win your $1 million. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at the broad definition of gambling, that we're covering all bases. And again, this is important when we're looking particularly at the gambling disorder side of things that we'll talk about shortly. And some other things that could pop up. Arby's is a restaurant that I go to. Evidently, I eat out a lot with McDonald's and Arby's, but Arby's, at the bottom of their receipt, it says, fill out the survey, and you could get a complimentary dessert. Since you complete the survey, there's no question of risk there, because you're automatically going to get that dessert. That would not factor into gambling. However, for the bottom of those receipts, if you fill out the survey, then you get an opportunity to be entered into a drawing to win X amount of money or a gift card or whatever. So with that element of risk, that bit would factor into the very broad definition of gambling. And for the vast majority of people, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you have someone that is going around the parking lot trying to pick up extra receipts, or as every person leaves, they're trying to get extra receipts from people, they're spending all their time at home filling out these surveys, not engaging with their friends and family, not going to work, then that's where the problems arise. So we just want to think very broadly about the definition of gambling, so we're clear on kind of all levels. And I relate things best to things that I know. And when we think of games of chance, Candyland is something that comes to mind, because practice does not increase your odds of winning. So with Candyland, you've got your little tickets or your cards, and you flip them over, and that tells you how many colors or spaces to move. And there's not a whole lot of chance, or there's not a whole lot of skill to it, unless it's skill to end the game more quickly by cheating so my niece can win. Other things that go to games of chance are things like bingo and roulette, lottery, slot machines. These are all things that it doesn't matter how often you play or how smart you are, there's no added benefit to your practice or your knowledge. Things that have games of skill that we can relate to commonly would be things like Monopoly or Scrabble, where there's an element of chance. With Monopoly, there's the chance cards, but there's also the dice. There's other things that kind of factor into that. Same thing with Scrabble. You might be great at playing letters, but if you don't get good letters to play with, then you're going to be limited. So while there's an element of skill, there's also some bit of a chance element in there as well. So when we're looking at sports, so whether it's basketball, soccer, golf, etc., whether I am actually participating in the sport and am playing with my friends in gambling, or if I'm betting on a professional team, that all factors in with the sports. Then we have billiards, chess, depending on the board games or card games, arcade games, there's a lot of variances there. So it's just a good idea to know what involves games of skill and what involves games of chance. When we're looking at professional gamblers, they're not going to be involved in games of chance. They're going to be more involved in games of skill because that's where they have the competitive advantage. When we're thinking about gambling, there's a lot of times communities receive messaging that it is all negative, and that's not necessarily true. When we're looking at some benefits to gambling, and there are some community benefits that we need to acknowledge, we have to be mindful that nationally approximately 86% of those in the United States gamble. So that is a very strong majority. So if we go in with the mindset that gambling is the devil and only negative things are going to happen from it, then we're not going to be consistent with the norms of our community. So we just want to be mindful about what some of these benefits to the community are. Such as creating jobs, raising revenue, increasing social connectedness, and looking at forms of an adult play. As adults, we don't have an opportunity to play a lot, and when we're looking at gambling, the focus should be on entertainment. So again, when we're looking at our communities, 86% of those in the United States gamble. So we want to be consistent with that, and so we're knowledgeable about the community norms and those expectations. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some challenges with gambling. Gambling disorder is certainly one of those challenges. Family dysfunction and domestic violence, family problems, social problems, looking at youth and some of the challenges that it could have related to underage gambling. Just like with substance abuse, early introduction of gambling can relate to a higher chance of developing a gambling problem down the road. Co-occurring disorders with other substances, with mental health issues. There's a lot of things that can really factor into that. And while 86% of the population gamble, 5 to 7% of the population are classified as problem gamblers. And within that 5 to 7, and then kind of narrowing down a little bit more specifically, approximately 1% of the nation would be classified as having a gambling disorder. So 5 to 7% would have experienced problems related to gambling, and about 1% who would be diagnosable as having a gambling disorder. So when we think about reasons as to why folks gamble, there could be for excitement, enjoyment, to win money. So those are pretty positive things, especially when we're looking at the excitement and enjoyment, because the focus of gambling should really be on the entertainment aspect. Other things that could be reasons for gambling would be peer pressure, relieving boredom, or relieving feelings of depression. If you're thinking about gambling for relieving boredom or feeling because you're depressed, then that's not a very good way to cope with that. Additionally, if there's a strong pressure to gamble, that's not necessarily going to be a good thing as well. And for peer pressure, we can experience peer pressure at all levels. Youth can experience peer pressure to gamble just as much as senior citizens can. If I'm in an assisted living home and there's a bus going from my village to a casino, there could be a lot of social pressure to go. And once I'm there could be a lot of social pressure to participate. So when we're thinking about peer pressure, it's not just from a youth perspective, but from all levels. So when we're thinking about gambling and approaching our communities, my recommendation is that you address gambling from a very neutral perspective. Much like we would with other substances, such as alcohol, where we know that there's a legal majority that are able to participate, as well as a minority that's not able to participate. The same things with gambling. And we want to address it from a disease control perspective, just like we would alcohol, just like we would other drugs, because having a gambling disorder is a disease like these other things, and we'll talk about that further. When you're thinking about kind of your community and where your community's at, think about some of the limited public health attention that is going to be addressed towards gambling. We spend a lot of money looking at alcohol and its impact on society. We look at a lot of other things, such as other illnesses that might be happening, thinking about high-risk behaviors. So gambling doesn't just happen. There's other things that are kind of associated with that. And then looking at the stigma that can be associated with that as well. And we know that within the alcohol and drug field, in mental health as well, there's a lot of stigma associated with that. And there's that much or more associated with those that are having gambling problems because in many communities it's just the view of if you have a problem, then just quit, and then you won't have a problem anymore. And we know that's not the case with substances, and gambling in terms of brain chemistry, etc., is so linked to substances. We want to be mindful of that. And also, when you're addressing communities, address from a gambling awareness perspective. In a lot of communities, when you go in to talk about problem gambling, communities will say, well, I don't have a gambling problem within my community, so I don't really need to be concerned about it. So go in with the approach of just raising awareness related to gambling and what it is, and that will be helpful in opening more doors to your community than if you're just going in to talk about problem gambling. When we're looking at kind of the changing in the field related to gambling, we've seen a lot of changes in a relatively short amount of time. Historically, when we're looking at 1970s and before, when you had a problem with gambling, you went to your spiritual leader, and he or she would help guide you in that process. It wasn't until 1972 that the term compulsive gambling was developed by Robert Custer of the VA hospital here in Ohio. So when we're looking at 40 plus years, that's not a lot of time to look at kind of the development of this disorder. And it wasn't until 1980 that pathological gambling was actually added to the diagnostic criteria for diagnosing disorders. So when we're looking at what a problem gambler is, according to the National Council on Problem Gambling behavior which causes disruptions in any major area of life. So it can be psychological, physical, social, or vocational. So that's pretty broad, and what I like about the definition is that while there could be financial aspects to all of these, the focus isn't on financial disruptions. It's psychological, physical, social, or vocational. And certainly gambling problems go beyond just the financial aspect and factor into these other areas as well. So when we're looking at problem gambling and what it is, it's not related to frequency or amount. So I could be a professional gambler and not necessarily would I have a problem. When we look at the World Series of Poker, I think that's great opportunities to kind of look at who those professional gamblers are. It's also good opportunities to kind of look at those community norms and to see what are kind of the messaging that is being received by young people. And when we're looking at problem gambling, we're looking at whether the individual's life is disrupted by gambling. So if is gambling taking precedence over other activities? Are they participating in gambling activities as opposed to spending time with families, going to work? Are they experiencing adverse consequences, such as spending all of their money so they're not able to afford rent and they get evicted? Are they losing their job? Or is there social relationship issues? So those are the things that we want to think about when we're looking at problem gambling. When we're looking at risk factors for gambling, we see, much like with substance abuse, family history is a factor. Family history of substance abuse is a factor. Exposure to young age. So all these things that we see are very similar to what we already know in the alcohol and drug field. One that I found interesting was a family that overemphasizes money and competition. I think we can all think to the families that we know either growing up or work with now in our communities where there's a strong presence of competition and kind of one-upmanship. And I just thought that was interesting, thinking about how that might relate into problems down the road. Also, an early big win. So if statistically odds are you're going to lose when you're participating in gambling, that's why the focus really should be on the fun aspect. So we want to think about what that early big win could be, and that could be kind of a trigger of always trying to chase the feeling of that first big win. When we're looking at gender, males are significantly more likely to become problem gamblers than females, and that could be because they're also more likely to be gamblers than females. The reasoning as to why is kind of hard to determine. And also, pre-existing mood disorders or anxiety disorders, substance abuse disorders, all those things also contribute to increased risk for developing gambling disorder. What's interesting is while there's a lot of similarities between substance abuse and other mental health problems as risk factors with gambling, when we look at the protective factors, those are almost completely aligned with what we already know within the risk and protective factor theory. So if we have a strong supportive environment, if we have an overall positive outlook, if we've got a strong connection to community, whether that be school, larger community, if there's self-esteem and internal control, all of these things serve as protective factors against problem gambling. So it's things that we already know and we're already kind of focused on in other areas. And for those that are not addressing gambling or not addressing it as holistically or consciously as they could be, these are just some things to kind of think about. Also, when we're looking at kind of the circle of risk factor or risk behavior, high risk behaviors, gambling fits in there with drug use, delinquency, sexual behavior, violent activities, etc. So we see a lot of connections between gambling and other problems that we might see within our youth and our larger community. So the DSM-IV was just released last June, so it's been out for a little bit more than a year. So just had this poll question to ask you related to your DSM-V. And the question is, are you familiar with the gambling-related changes in the DSM-V? And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the DSM, it's the Diagnostic Manual for disorders, whether it's substance abuse disorders or mental health orders. And we'll give a little bit longer. We've got about 2/3 that have reported so far, and these numbers keep coming in. So again, that question is, are you familiar with the gambling-related changes in the DSM-V? Because when we look at the DSM, there are pretty significant changes that were made, and this is going to connect with us much more closely with the work that we're doing from a prevention side. So we're at 90%, so I'll go ahead and close that poll. And when we're looking at the results, the majority are not familiar with the changes in the DSM-V, so hopefully this will be something that will be beneficial to you. Just kind of a point to underscore is that when we're speaking about the DSM-V and the changes, I am from the prevention field. I am not a treatment practitioner. So when we're talking about these changes, it's really through the lens of prevention and not from a practitioner perspective. So from the DSM-V, it's included in the chapter on substance use disorders. It was moved from the DSM-IV, which was called impulse control disorder, and there were several reasons as to why that was. When we look at the rates of comorbidity between substance abuse and gambling, there was a very strong connection there. Also, we see that it fits best with substance abuse disorders than it does with other psychiatric conditions. And one of the benefits will hopefully be better recognition of the disorder, so you're not just treating an alcohol problem if it's if it should be a dual diagnosis of alcohol disorder and a gambling disorder. So hopefully there will be a lot of opportunities for further exploration there. And this is right out of the DSM-V. Previously, again, it was in the DSM-IV under the impulse control disorder. And when you're thinking about kind of the connection in the brain and when that pops from an impulse control disorder, the individual doesn't feel release until the action is taken. So for instance, with pyromania, it's not until the fire is set do they finally feel release. So they feel the pressure before, they feel the pressure during the action, and they don't get release until after. With gambling, it's during the action. Same thing with substance abuse, is that you feel the high when you're actually participating in the activity, so that it made sense from a brain development perspective as well. Some changes here from the DSM-IV. As you read down, says individual exhibiting 4 or more of the 9 criteria. For the DSM-V, it was DSM-IV was 5 or more of the 10 criteria, and previously it was in a lifetime. And they wanted to hone it down a little bit more and be more specific to a 12-month period, so that they're more clear about problems that might pop up. So of those 9 criteria, they include needs to gamble with increasing amounts of money in order to achieve the desired excitement. So when we're thinking about the substance abuse side of things, that definitely connects with tolerance. For our number 2 is restless or irritable when attempting to cut down or stop gambling. That clearly aligns with withdrawal. For number 3, we've got has made repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop gambling, and that goes back to loss of control. For number 4, preoccupation is identified, and we know that preoccupation is a significant part of identifying an alcohol or drug disorder. Looking at the remaining 5 criteria, also often feels gambled when feeling distressed. So we're using this to escape problems or escaping helplessness, trying to relieve depression. We see this, again, along with substance abuse disorders. The one that's a little different is number 6, after losing money, gambling often returns another day. So it's chasing one's losses, which we know from the substance abuse side of things that's a consistent theme. Lies to conceal the extent of involvement within gambling. I don't know about you, but I think when we look at substance abuse disorders, deceit is a pretty consistent factor that we see there. When we look at 8 and 9, we've got loss of relationships, we've got loss of opportunities, we've got relying on others to assist them. So all these things really factor into what we already know from the substance abuse side. So it only makes sense that it's kind of classified within the substance abuse chapter of the DSM-IV, and hopefully that will have some additional implications for it. So it could really lead to some newer developments, looking at public policy, research, looking at application in not only the treatment side of things, but the prevention side of things as well. For prevention, it can really lead to better community outreach. If we have a stronger understanding of how gambling is impactful on those who might have problems, then we're going to be much better to communicate that to the larger community. We're able to better hone our education skills, better do a better service for problem identification and referral. From a treatment side, we can be more inclusive with what we treat, so we're not having some folks kind of fall through the cracks, so we're being much more connected with that. And from an insurance perspective, there's some opportunities there possibly as well, with the DSM-IV being moved to the substance abuse category, whether it's through the ACA or through other opportunities through insurance, then this might be more expansive in the outreach. So when we're thinking about some similarities or differences between gambling and substance abuse, we have a lot of similarities. We've got lots of control, denial, blackouts, all these things kind of run consistent with one another. As for differences, gambling doesn't require ingestion like substances. So when we're looking at identifying those who could have a gambling disorder, then that could potentially be a problem because there's not a cup that you can pee into in order to determine if you're using. So from an employer perspective, there's additional monitoring that we'll have to be knowledgeable of. There's no physical damage to the body. You can't smell it. You can't see it. Someone might be completely exhausted from being up all night and coming to work and may not be performing well, but it's not something that you can test to see if that was why. While there's certainly opportunities for financial problems within substance abuse, one of the paramount distinctions for problem gambling and for identifying someone who has a gambling problem is those financial resources or lack thereof. And with that, it can often become a hidden addiction. We don't talk about finances very frequently as kind of a nation, so we are mindful of that, and it's not really a lot of times identified until we're kind of past the point of no return. For gambling, there's no set guidelines. For alcohol, we've got through Prevention Research Institute, NIAAA, we have guidelines that really set what is a low-risk use. For gambling, those guidelines aren't quite as finite as for other areas. Also, there are fewer prevention and treatment options. If you're looking to treatment providers who cover gambling, that pot is much smaller than when we're looking at mental health issues or other substance abuse issues, just because there's not enough skilled people to kind of help address that. When we're looking at a social gambler and problem gamblers, there's several distinctions there. For a social gambler, it's someone who would gamble occasionally, whereas with a problem gambler, it's much more frequent. That doesn't mean that a problem gambler isn't necessarily, or a frequent gambler necessarily is a problem gambler. It's just an additional kind of warning sign. For a social gambler, they determine the amount of money that they're going to play with, and once that money is expended, then they're done and they go home. With a problem gambler, they're really chasing those losses. They'll play with money that is either needed or borrowed, so they've gone through their own expenses and will look for other resources. They hope to win but expect to lose for a social gambler, and this is really one of those big distinctions. For a social gambler, the focus is entertainment, and they know going in the odds are they're going to lose. But they hope that while they're losing, that they're having a good time with their friends, they're socializing, they're having positive interactions. With the problem gambler, the focus is not only with the financial aspect, but also with that expectation of winning. That either they're due to win or they deserve to win. It's not necessarily logical, but is something that they kind of expected. With the social gambler, they can take it or leave it. They can go to a casino or go to a movie, and for them it is pretty much all the same. So it's not one thing or the other. From a problem gambler, their life really does revolve around gambling, so they'll be focused on when they can participate. So if getting back to the casino, gambling with a casino is an issue, so kind of things to think about there. When we're looking at gambling problems, again, the vast majority of those who gamble don't have a problem. And Cornyn and Schaefer put together the Gambling Continuum in 1999. And I think this is a good kind of visual of the funnel down of those who have problems into the vast majority who don't participate or who don't have problem gambling at all. And the type of prevention and treatment mechanisms in place for that. So when we're looking at those who either don't gamble or those who are social gambling, just a primary prevention message would be the most important. When we're kind of looking smaller down the funnel, where problem gambling pops in, and then pathological gambling. Pathological gambling was identified in the DSM-III and DSM-IV, and is now within the DSM-V and classified as a gambling disorder. So this slide still reflects that, since Cornyn and Schaefer put it together before the DSM-V came out. But when we see the really strong break between the social gambler and the problem gambler, where we see what could be classified as healthy gambling and unhealthy gambling. So we want to be mindful of that, and again, just that the majority of folks who do gamble do so in a way that is low risk and not challenging to themselves. So it's just those that have problems that we really want to be very mindful of and have mechanisms in place to help identify them. So when we're thinking about gambling and how it might be worked into what we're already doing, we should really look at the other activities that we cover. So if we're looking at alcohol, for instance, how could we add gambling to a piece of that? So if we're looking at a community festival in which alcohol is served and there's opportunities for gambling, and as we're having conversations about alcohol, we can also have conversations about gambling. We should connect with parents and have gambling as something that's on their radar. Because if parents don't know about it, then they're not going to think to talk to their children about it. And we know that as children age, parents feel less comfortable talking to them about anything, particularly gambling or substance abuse problems. So we should make the ability to connect with them and have those conversations as easy as possible. Also, we want to think about our community norms and what the environment related to gambling looks like. So if we walk down a street and every corner store is plastered with gambling signage, or if we've got billboards for gambling establishments or other things popping up, what kind of message does that say to our community, and what kind of normative reinforcements are being had there? When we're thinking about approaches for gambling, we really want to look at those strategic goals and making sure that they're aligning with some of the other things that we're linking on. So thinking about some of those gambling-related problems and work to prevent those. looking at protecting vulnerable groups. From risk and protective factor theory, we know that youth could be a vulnerable group. From gambling, it could be elderly individuals who might have limited income and will have some challenges there. In the survey that we did here in Ohio, it was identified that those that were 18 to 25 was at the greatest likelihood to become problem gamblers. So that's something that we could think about and are working to develop messaging to help address that. And we want to make sure that we're promoting balanced and informed attitudes, behaviors, and policies, so we don't have individuals going in with the expectation that they're going to win because they're due, or that there's school policies that cover alcohol but don't cover gambling. So we want to make sure that there's consistency kind of at all levels. When we're looking at some approaches to gambling, we want to look at the public health principles that we already know. So prevention is a community priority, and when we're looking at allocating resources within the realm of prevention, really prevention is prevention is prevention. So we want to make sure that gambling is connected to some of those resources. And those conversations are had at not only at the school level, but a community level as well. Also looking at incorporating mental health promotion approaches into the efforts. So we're making that connection with gambling and mental health. Again, the rates of suicide ideation and attempted suicides are much higher among those who are problem gamblers. Other mental health issues are much greater, so we want to be mindful of that and help relay that information to communities. Also looking at fostering personal and social responsibility for gambling policies and practices. So whether this would be a policy for casinos or lottery institutions, whether this is a practice for schools to kind of look at, or if it's a policy within your own institution, do you have a policy related to gambling within your institution? And this should have been a full question, I didn't think about it. Do you have a policy? Do you know what the policy is, and is it enforced? In the conversations that I've had throughout Ohio, most do not have policies, and for those that do, they're either unevenly enforced or not enforced at all. So just things to be mindful of when we're thinking about how we can infuse gambling into some of the things that we're already working on. When we're looking at harm reduction can play a pretty significant role in addressing gambling problems, and there was a lot of discussion in some of the trainings that I did related to harm reduction, because there's a lot of polarization there that some folks see there's no place for harm reduction within treatment strategies, and others see that it's a huge place. So I have to think about what that might look like. But when we're looking at harm reduction, we shouldn't just think about harm reduction within those who are problem gamblers or those with gambling disorder, but also kind of our community members that just participate in gambling anyway. So we want to focus on healthy gambling guidelines for the entire public, not just certain individuals. Looking at ways to early identify those who could have a problem. So if I'm coming in for an assessment for an alcohol issue, that I could also have questions asked about my gambling choices. When we're looking at school institutions, having teachers and other staff more knowledgeable about what gambling is and what it looks like, and some potential problems that could factor into that to help be that identification purpose, or that identification point. And certainly flexible treatment goals and surveillance and reporting systems all kind of factor into helping identify some areas where we can focus on for gambling. From community-wide approaches, we want to look at partnering with local gambling establishments like we would with other areas. Again, if you're looking at that community festival, if you have relationships with the alcohol side of things, then have those conversations related to gambling. Looking at promoting voluntary exclusion programs. Voluntary exclusion programs vary by state and by kind of institution. For instance, in Ohio, for the casinos, I could voluntarily exclude to not be permitted to enter a casino from anywhere from 1 year to a lifetime exclusion. And if it would be an Ohio casino that is also owned by Caesars, which 2 of them are, if I voluntarily exclude one Caesars property, then that would be applicable to all Caesar properties worldwide. So we want to make sure that we're knowledgeable about what the mechanisms are in place to help those who might have a problem and kind of drive them in the right direction. Also, we want to help community members recognize those risk factors. Again, hopefully you're well-versed in risk and protective factor theory. The risk factors related to problem gambling are very similar to those within the alcohol and drugs spectrum that we already know. The protective factors are almost 100% consistently aligned. So we already know these things, so it's just tacking gambling onto the things that we're already talking about. Also looking at identifying friends and family members. So having conversations with the community as a whole, they may not have a problem, but they could be sources to help identify those who do, and look at locating resources. Those can be prevention resources, those can be treatment resources, those can be problem identification and referral resources, folks that we can really connect with and have a broader net of kind of the spectrum of gambling problems. Well, we're looking to apply our prevention principles to problem gambling. We also want to look at the protective factors that we already know. So look at developing those personal skills. The refusal skills, promoting healthy lifestyles, identifying social pressures, all of these things kind of help support those things, those protective factors, as well as creating supportive environments, really knowing the odds. I think when individuals are more knowledge of what the odds are, then that focus is going to be better calibrated towards the entertainment side and less towards the fun-generating side, because, again, the odds are they're not going to win, so they should know that going in. And I'm not saying anything that gambling establishments disagree with. We had great conversations with owners of the racinos and casinos, and just really their focus is entertainment, and as we promote these things, we want the focus to be entertainment. Because again, with the vast majority of individuals who are participating in gambling, they should know the odds of playing. Odds are you're not going to win the Powerball. Your life would be forever changed if you did, but just know that the chances are pretty astronomical that that's not going to happen. Also looking at strength and community action, so you're really developing networks within communities. And when you're attacking gambling onto things you're already doing, that might open doors for other partners that you may not have thought of before. So we're looking at gambling and the connection to financial impacts. You can talk to banks and credit unions and other areas that might be feeling some negative impact for those that have gambling problems. Have those conversations and kind of use that as the entryway into making them more connected with what you're working on. Also looking at building a stronger public health policy. So communities are looking more holistically about what some of the things that they can do related to gambling, and they're more thoughtful about how that could fit into the other things that we do. When we're looking to address community needs, we want to do so broadly, and hopefully you're familiar with CSAP's 6 prevention strategies. Information dissemination is pretty decently done from gambling, from what we've seen. From the kind of treatment side, a lot of focus has been on the education and problem identification and referral side. So what we really want to look at is areas related to community-based process and environmental, so we can be more mindful of what the community impact on gambling is, and so we can develop approaches and policies appropriate to that. For those that are thinking that they might have a problem, or for the individuals that you might be partnering with, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of some self-assessment and screening tools that were available. There's 4 that I'm aware of. There's the SOGs, the NODs, and the 20 questions. All of these will help identify those who are problem gamblers. The BBGS is specific to those who are pathological gamblers or who have that gambling disorder. It's 3 questions, so it's much smaller than the others. So it will help with that pathology, but not necessarily identify those who have a problem. All of these assessment and screening tools are available through the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services website here in Ohio, and that website is there. Again, I will email the PowerPoint slides out. It'll probably be on Friday when everything gets posted, so you'll get this, the slides in a follow-up email, so you don't have to feverishly work to jot that down. I also wanted to make you aware of SmartBet, the Gambling Resource Center, and that is something that has been developed here at Drug Free Action Alliance and is resources that are available not only for professionals but also for the broader community members. So we've got things kind of targeted towards those individuals to be more mindful of things that you might be seeing. From a professional side, one of the things that we heard from our community members is that we really needed to have some better sense of terminology. So if I'm in a classroom and someone's talking about terminology related to gambling, if I'm not familiar with it, then that's not going to be something that is really going to be on my radar. So these resources are all available at the Drug Free Action Alliance website at drugfreeactionalliance.org /SmartBet. And I have pulling it up on the screen here as well. So this is what the website looks like. You can either access it from our homepage, or you can also access it through the program section at Drug Free Action Alliance on the drop-down. So that's another resource that's available to you. Again, we want to have it something that is good for not only the larger community, but professionals as well from both the prevention and the treatment side, so we can be more knowledgeable and better equipped to address some of the problems that we might be experiencing within our communities. Other resources that are available nationally are on your screen now. There's the National Center of Responsible Gambling, who has collegegambling.org. There's the National Council on Problem Gambling, Gamblers Anonymous, and the Responsible Gambling Council. So those are all national resources where you can get some additional information. And that is all that I have for now. We've got a few minutes for questions, so please go to your webinar navigation panel and ask the questions that you have. And the first question is from Lonnie. What is the current expectations of gambling advisory groups to added to the research already being done? We are having a pretty strong problem with identifying research and getting good data in Ohio and nationally. So, Lonnie, your question is a good one, and we really need a lot of help within identifying what problem gambling looks like and how we can be better able to serve those who do have gambling problems. Again, nationally, problem gambling affects about 5 to 7% of the population, and a gambling disorder is about 1% of the population. But the numbers seeking treatment are far less than that. In fact, we've got resources set aside, and I'm talking about not only in Ohio but other states that are dedicated for addressing gambling problems, but it's not something that they're seeing a lot of treatment for. So this is an opportunity for really making those connections, getting additional data so we can hone our resources. Because going in prior to the state's data, I just kind of expected that the largest population group that would have a problem would be the elderly group, just from kind of what I passively know about bingo, and didn't really think about that to 18 to 24 population. So great question, and work with the folks that you have within your community that will hopefully be able to help you with that. For Will, is intervention, oops, I'm sorry, Will, more questions keep coming in. Let me scroll back up. Is intervention more difficult than for substance abuse? I think it is, because it's more difficult to identify. When we talk about gambling, usually the intervention point is more related to financial resources than other problems that might be experienced. So that's really where we want to be mindful about some of the warning signs to have related to problem gambling and some of the tips for low-risk gambling. And those tips for low-risk gambling are available at SmartBet, and there's some that are also on your screen. So check that out, and it's really important for communities to be more mindful of what gambling looks like, and that will be more helpful for that intervention point to come in. Because if parents are giving their kids money and then they don't really know where it goes, it could be a conversation about where it's going and why, and really getting to possibly a root of a problem that's deeper than the parents might realize. I'm wondering, what are the best practice prevention and treatment programs for adolescents? I understand that adolescents have gambling disorders at twice the rate as adults. And that is from Vivian. Vivian, that's a good question. There on the SmartBet website, there is a link to resources, so you can certainly check those out. The school-based programs are kind of limited, and the one is readily utilized in the state, and I can't remember what it's called. It's completely escaping me. Jenny, if you're on the line, if you could email that to me or put that in the questions, that would be great. It's just completely escaping me. So there are some prevention programs that are available for students. They're all school-based. When we're looking at NREP certified programs outside of school-based strategies, I'm not aware of any. So we'll have to be mindful of that. And also just being mindful of the relationship between individual prevention efforts and environmental prevention efforts. So we're preparing our communities appropriately in order to better serve the needs of the individuals. From Kat, in my experience, most of the people I've met are using internet almost exclusively. Do any of the resources just listed address that activity specifically? Kat, no, not that I'm aware of. In Ohio, internet gaming isn't something that it was less than 1% of the population for the survey that we had, so that's not an area that we're focused on quite yet. There is resources from the UK that looks more specifically at internet gambling and also internet online gaming, because there's some correlation between that as well. And Kat, if you email me, I will email you those resources. I'll just have to spend a little time to find them. And Nicole says that she can share the gambling data from five counties in Ohio. They served over 50,000 7th through 12th graders in the fall of 2013. Thank you, Nicole. This is one of the other challenges that we're having, not only within the state but nationally, is that there's no place that consistently surveys gambling use within school-age students. So we look at monitoring the future pride. There are not standard questions that factor into that. Nicole with the Coalition for Drug-Free Greater Cincinnati implements the Pride survey, and they had added additional questions to that. So that's a resource that could be available as well. Thank you, Nicole. And from Sheila, Summit and Portage counties, which are in northeast Ohio, are in the process of doing community needs assessment. If anyone is interested in completing the needs assessment survey in Summit or Portage County, you can contact Sheila Smith at the Summit County Community Partnership. And Nicole said, more importantly, we can share the questions so they can stay consistent across the state and nationally as well. So for those of you who are joining us from outside Ohio, I expect that you're experiencing some of the challenges that we've been experiencing, and would really like to share the resources that we have. Nicole's offered those questions up that she's implemented within or entered with the Pride survey. So that's something that we can have available to you as well. If you do have other questions, please feel free to enter those into the question sections of your GoToWebinar navigation panel. Just want to let you know that we do have a survey that will be coming out post-session to get a better sense of your community's needs and to better gauge the resources that we provide you and the ways that we're able to kind of get this information out through our monthly webinars. We will not be doing a webinar in July. We'll be starting in August with our state fiscal year and kind of kicking off there. There are no other questions at this time, so if questions do pop up, feel free to contact me at Drug Free Action Alliance, and my contact information is coming on the screen. And thank you, Emily via Jenny, for Stacked Deck. Stacked Deck is the evidence-based program, the school-age evidence-based program that it was completely escaping me. So thanks to both Jenny and Emily for sending that in. Stacked Deck, you can just Google Stacked Deck, and you'll be able to find that. So thank you all again. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. And again, post-call, probably sometime around Friday, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recorded session, a copy of the PowerPoint information, a link to the SmartVet site, as well as a certificate certificate of attendance. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you next time. Have a wonderful summer.